Good morning, y'all. Happy July 7th. It's your boy Nicky Stees here. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the prize ring. I'm going to talk about some of the biggest boxing upsets throughout my lifetime that helped have some big impact on the sport or some big impact on my perspective. Take it away. Before I officially get started on the list, I'm going to briefly give you overview of the criteria. So for my list, I'm going based off what were the most significant, either for me as a fan or on the sport in general. Kind of like to some degree, domino effect upsets. Like, what are some big upsets throughout my lifetime, going back to the early 2000s, that had a significant effect on the sport going forward? That's going to be my main criteria for it. So this is mostly going to be early 2000s onward. This is my lifetime. So there's going to be no Tyson Douglas, Hagler Leonard, etc. But let's dive right into it, though. My first one I'm going to start with is from January 2003, the late Vernon the Viper Forrest, rest in peace, his third round knockout loss to Ricardo Mayorga. This fight right here is significant because it started the Ricardo Mayorga monster, if you will, where his trash-talking attitude, his pro wrestling villain-like personality helped sell, and he made a lot of money off a lot of big fights, even for a guy who, outside of his two victories over Vernon Forrest in 03, never really had any true significant victories outside of an 07 win over Fernando Vargas, which has an asterisk on it because Vargas was past his peak and a bit out of shape. But Ricardo Mayorga was always a draw based on his pro wrestling like villain personality. And his victory over Vernon Forrest in 03 with the image of him smoking a cigarette in the ring after the fight as he's being interviewed by Larry Merchant kind of started that appeal because at his press conferences, you remember, he was wilding. He was talking crazy trash, most notably in the build-up to his Mayo 6 fight with Oscar De La Hoya, where he's talking all this crazy stuff about Oscar De La Hoya's Latin pop album, about his wife, which he ended up being made to eat his words. But the point being is that villain personality that Ricardo Mayorga had, he was made based on his victory over Vernon Forrest. That was his big claim to fame. So I got that as my number one because that had a significant effect on creating the Ricardo Mayorga monster, where he was that big villain that could hype up fights and people would pay to see lose. So that's why I got this as a significant upset, because without that win, I don't think the Ricardo Mayorga appeal, the Ricardo Mayorga persona comes to life as big as it did. So that's why I got this one on here. The second one is Vladimir Klitschko's March 2003 second round knockout loss to South African journeyman Corey Sanders. Now, Vladimir, to his credit, did eventually bounce back, had a nice run the heavyweight division from 2005 to 2015 until his loss to Tyson Fury late that year, where he switched up his style with the help of the late trainer Emmanuel Stewart. But I got this upset on here because prior to this, there was some big talks about a possible Vladimir Klitschko-Lennox Lewis fight, but really, I think this loss right here in March 2003 to Corey Sanders derailed any chance of that happening. And I think to some degree, it did hurt Vladimir's appeal and his drawing power. Because I think in an alternate timeline where he doesn't have that loss to Corey Sanders, maybe we get that Vladimir Lennox Lewis fight. Granted, near the end of Lewis's career, but still, if we get that fight and Vladimir gets a win over Lennox Lewis, that would have helped his appeal and his drawing power just to have that on his resume to say he beat Lennox Lewis. It would have had the asterisk of a on the downhill late 30s Lennox Lewis, but it would have still been on his resume and would have helped his drawing power. But I think that loss to Corey Sanders, followed by an 04 upset loss to Lama and Brewster, it did hurt Vladimir Klitschko's drawing power and appeal to some degree, but mainly the Corey Sanders loss. Like I said, he bounced back, but that loss did have some negative effects on the heavyweight division, particularly from an appeal standpoint and a draw standpoint. The next one, you go to May 2004. Antonio Magic Man Tarver stops Roy Jones Jr. in the second round with a straight left hand that shocked the world. Prior to this, Roy Jones Jr. was practically the Superman of the boxing world. They had a close fight, him and Tarver, in November of 03. Jones got the decision, but Tarver wanted a rematch. Roy felt he had something to prove, so he accepted it. But then Tarver beat him here. And this is significant because it started a complete 180 on Roy Jones' career. It was like Superman hit his kryptonite, and it just was all downhill from there. I mean, after that, Roy Jones Jr., it was like him in his old age. He lost to Tarver in the rematch, lost to Glenn Cough Johnson, lost the rubber match to Tarver. He had some wins after that, but they weren't really anything to write home about. Then he lost to Joe Calzaghe, eventually lost a rematch to Bernard Hopkins. He lost to a Russian boxer named Dennis Leviathan. I mean, he just took a whole bunch of L's after that loss to Tarver. I mean, that's why it's so significant. Roy Jones Jr., the Superman of the boxing world, took his L and fell straight off the map. And not to take anything away from Tarver, but people remember that fight more as a representation of the beginning of the end for Roy Jones Jr. in the huge nosedive he took. I mean, granted, credit to Antonio Tarver, but Roy Jones Jr. took one of the worst and least fun nosedives of any athlete, especially in the boxing world. That one still sticks out in a lot of people's minds to this day. Next one, flash forward to 2008, you got Manny Pacquiao beating Oscar De La Hoya. Now, granted, De La Hoya was no longer that. He didn't have that invincible aura he had back in the late 90s. He had been beaten by this point. But remember, De La Hoya was the favorite because Pacquiao, who had dominated the lower weight classes, at that point, he was a lightweight in early '08. He was jumping up to welterweight to face De La Hoya, who was significantly bigger. A lot of people thought this would be a big mismatch in favor of the Golden Boy. But that was the big thing going into it. But instead, we had the exact opposite. Manny Pacquiao, it was one-sided, but the exact opposite in Pacquiao's favor. And this was the end of De La Hoya's career. He officially retired after this and became a promoter full-time. But for Pacquiao, this is when Pacquiao, who was already a star, who had already beaten Barrera, Morales, Larios, David Diaz, and those guys, became a huge superstar. Like, we know Manny Pacquiao is a big superstar in the boxing world. Because this was around the time the talks of the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight came together that never materialized. But it all started with that De La Hoya massacre where Manny Pacquiao became a huge superstar. So that sticks out to me right there. That fight's the representation of Manny Pacquiao's peak as a star and peak of his career. And now moving right along. Next one, I'm going to jump ahead. Anthony Joshua losing to Andy Ruiz Jr. in 2019. It's significant because this kind of started the what could have been for Anthony Joshua. Because remember, Joshua was a very big deal in the heavyweight division. He stopped Vladimir Klitschko in 2017 in the fight of the year. And he was still, I think he was unbeaten at the time going into the Andy Ruiz Jr. first fight. So there was a lot of appeal behind Joshua thinking he could be the next face of the heavyweight division. Possibly a big fight between him and Tyson Fury, or a big fight between Joshua and Wilder was a possibility at the time. But then he lost to Andy Ruiz Jr. He did eventually get him back in a rematch, but that right there kind of started the what could have been, because once Joshua suffered that first L, he never got back that aura of being invincible and the potential future face of the division, because he lost there, took a couple losses to Usyk. He took a loss last year. I just can't remember the name off the top of my head, but that Anthony Joshua appeal was drastically hurt by that loss to Andy Ruiz Jr., and he never got back to that level again. Like I said, despite getting his win back against Ruiz, he took the L's to Usyk, who's the current heavyweight champ, but that right there kind of stings in it, especially for the promoters that were high on Joshua. They feel robbed, like they never got the return. And next one, we're going to go with Dmitry Bivol versus Saul Canelo Alvarez back in 2022. Now, Canelo, this and the Mayweather loss in 2013 were his only losses. But this is significant because it started the rise of Dmitry Bivol in the mainstream. Bivol was already a good fighter at this point. He had some recognition, but most people, myself included, didn't really know who Dmitry Bivol was until he beat Canelo Alvarez in 2022. So I consider it significant because from a personal standpoint, I started to follow Bivol more after his victory over Canelo. It was that factor of, oh, this guy just beat Canelo and did so in impressive fashion. I got to start following this guy more and see what he does next. So that was significant right there because now you had the Bivol Beterbiev fights, 1 and 2, that had, that were kind of a big deal. And so that right there is significant because that started the rise to Dmitry Bivol. And maybe we get a Bivol Beterbiev fight, get a third fight possibly, and then maybe that could follow up with the winner of that fight facing David Benavidez at light heavyweight maybe, but that's another discussion for another time. But the point is, that was a significant deal because it gave way to a new star. And unlike, say, Manny Pacquiao, Timothy Bradley, where people didn't buy into it because they knew Pacquiao should have won when the decision was awarded to Bradley back in June 2012, Bivol actually beat Canelo in 2022 in a convincing enough fashion where people wanted to see what he would do next. The last one for me, I'm going to go with Deontay Wilder. Lost last year. What was that? I'm trying to remember his name. Give me 1 second. It was Zhang. It was Deontay Wilder. Yeah, he lost last year, I think in June last year. And he was knocked out by Zhang, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably butcher the pronunciation, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Last year in June, Wilder took that loss, and to me, that was the end of me caring about Deontay Wilder and taking him seriously. He had a fight recently, he won, but I didn't really care enough to tune in or to really follow with what happened. Once he took that loss last year to Zhang, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of the end of Deontay Wilder. This is the end of him being a big deal in the heavyweight division. He had exciting fights with Tyson Fury, even when he fell short. But now, seeing him in his late 30s take that loss, I just felt like this was an over-the-hill guy losing, and that was kind of the end for me of his appeal. But those are some of the ones that stood out to me. You guys let me know, what are some of the boxing upsets that you feel were the most significant or that stood out to you the most in your lifetime? Feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. Also, if you haven't done so, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. We mostly do NFL and NBA content. We do throw some boxing content in here as well as we're doing in this one. So please make sure to subscribe if you're looking for any of the three or all the three. And until next time, y'all, boy Nicky Stees signing off. Have a great day. Peace.